Welcome to Chopping Board Economics, where cooking brings economics alive. I'm Peter Ormosi from the University of East Anglia. Join me for an episode of Everyday Economics, explained through some of my favourite recipes. Hi, today's episode is released just before Christmas, so I'm going to make a poppy seed and a walnut beigli, both of which are essential part of Hungarian Christmas celebrations. What's also handy is that poppies are often used as a source of opium. Therefore, a recipe can be nicely linked up with a discussion of pharmaceutical drugs. Opium is an active ingredient in many painkillers. Why am I telling you this? Because the same way you can buy branded and non-branded ingredients for your beigli, you have a choice between branded and generic painkillers. However, competition between the latter two is much more limited. Pharmaceutical companies spend a huge amount of money on developing new drugs. On average, it costs around $2.5 billion to get a new drug from scratch to the market. But that's only the cost of drugs that actually make it to the market. It is estimated that the success rate of new drugs can be as low as 5% for some treatment areas. So why is it still worth it? Dr. Bakari, an expert in the economics of pharma, helps me explain.
When a new drug is developed, it receives patent protection which is for 20 years. Although a lot of this time is lost in development and clinical trials before it hits the market. This is why innovative drugs are guaranteed a period of market exclusivity when no other company can sell the same product. The purpose is to ensure that research active firms can recover their cost of developing new drugs.
So, do they recover these costs? Oh yes. Having no competition, they can charge a high price and scoop up a nice amount of revenue from the drug. When the marketing exclusivity period expires, generics, which are bioequivalent copies of the brand name drugs, get a green light to sell the same drug under a generic name. This leads to a price drop. Estimates are that in the UK, prices settle at around 20% of the original brand price after generic entry. Despite this, branded drugs are still the main source of revenue. Today in the US, more than 80% of the drugs sold are generics, yet almost 75% of drug revenue are from branded products. The disparity between the revenue from branded and generic drugs is striking, especially given that you wouldn't normally see the same difference for most other products. Why? Well, let's take our ingredients. For example, flour manufacturers don't need to recoup the same amount of innovation expenses to start with. Moreover, competition tends to work better between food producers. Okay, so we're going to need flour for our beigli. I'm using 500 grams here. You'll also need 250 grams of butter, 50 grams of sugar, 3 egg yolks, 200 milliliters of milk, and a teaspoon of dried yeast. For the filling, you'll need 250 grams of poppy seed, the same amount of ground walnut, 100 milliliters of milk, 200 grams of sugar, some raisins, 2 apples, and some lemon zest. Now I tend to buy these ingredients in a non-branded version, which is fairly easy for food. But is it equally easy to buy the generic version of drugs? Let's see. Given the astronomical revenue from having no competition, it is not surprising that branded companies try very hard to maintain their position. How do they do that? One way is to develop a new drug. This is the outcome we would all want to see, new patent protection for an innovative new drug. However, sometimes the innovation is only incremental. For example, just before a patent is about to expire, the pharma company can change the formulation from regular to an extended release capsule or some other form and obtain a new patent for that drug. On one hand, the new formulation may in fact be innovative and beneficial for some patients, but it's equally likely that they're just a cynical attempt to extend the monopoly period for the drug. In any case, if the patients switch to the newer, patent-protected version, then entry on the non-extended release version doesn't bring down healthcare costs, as very few patients will use the generic drug. Generic companies could challenge the patent as not being innovative enough or that the generic drug doesn't violate the patent. But guess how the branded companies would respond? By paying off the generic to delay entry. For how long? Anything between 1 to 10 years. By accepting the payment, the generic firm also obtains the ability to be the first to enter at a later point in time and to be the only generic for 6 months, which gives them a great advantage and deters other generic companies. So how often does it happen?
Between 2000 and 2010, there were 57 pay-for-delay deals in the EU. Similar deals are much more common in the US, where just between 2008 and 2010, there were 66 such settlements.
So here's an example. Altace is a drug for high blood pressure and costs $115. Its generic counterpart costs $12. So when the patent on Altace expired, entry by the generic would have meant a large drop in price and huge losses in revenue for Sanofi, who produces Altace. So in 2006, they paid to delay generic entry for 3 years. This gave Sanofi an extra 3 years of enjoying a revenue of around $700 million per year. So why don't we see the same for food? Why doesn't the branded manufacturer do the same to exclude supermarket own-label products? Patents also exist for foods, but most food products are fairly established and patents only relate to small changes to them. Moreover, producing and selling food is much less restricted by regulation. Just because a flour manufacturer doesn't have access to a specific patent for a crop type, it doesn't mean it cannot produce and sell flour from other types of crop. So luckily, we don't see the same limitation of market entry as in pharma. So what about recipes? Well, theoretically, you could patent your recipe and acquire a monopoly position, but you would need to show that your innovation is novel and non-obvious, which is unlikely to be true for any recipe. Lucky for us, so we're perfectly free to make this bejgli. Add the sugar and the yeast to the lukewarm milk and wait for around 10 minutes for the yeast to activate. In a large bowl, work the butter into the flour, then add the yeast, 2 egg yolks and sugar. Mix it all together. You should get a fairly hard dough. Cover it with a kitchen towel and leave in a warm place for around 30 minutes. Whilst waiting, grate the apples, then mix the poppy seeds with half the sugar, the milk, the raisins and the apples, and finally add some lemon zest. Mix the ground walnut with the remaining ingredients. Then roll half the dough out on a lightly floured surface to form a long rectangle about half a finger thick. Spread the poppy seed filling on the dough, leaving about an inch at the edges. Roll the dough up to form a log and press the ends to seal. Repeat for the other half with the walnut filling. Then put the 2 logs in a baking tray on some baking paper. Beat the egg and brush the logs. Then let it rest in a warm place for about an hour. Brush again with the egg, then poke holes on the top to allow the steam out. Preheat the oven at around 180 degrees and put in the bejgli and bake for around 30-40 minutes until golden brown. Pay for delay and similar deals that block competition from entering a market leave patients out of pocket. But the picture isn't always so clear. The excessive use of opioid drugs in the US led to an epidemic scale of abuse. Oxycodone is a semi-synthetic opiate drug that is used to fight pain from injuries or surgeries. When patent protection expired on oxycodone, the manufacturer developed a modification to the original drug that made it more difficult to tamper with and to abuse. This development received another spell of patent protection. Of course, the price of oxycodone remained high for those who are in genuine need, but the public health benefits of potentially reducing oxycodone abuse is also clear. So, what can we do? We probably wouldn't want to outright ban pay-for-delay deals, as there might be a good reason for firms to make out-of-court settlements. What we want is bad deals to be eliminated. For example, when the patent is weak and the deal attempts to artificially extend monopoly life on a non-innovative drug. In such a case, if a pay-for-delay deal is made with a generic, the branded firm can keep others at bay by threatening to allow this generic firm to enter the market if any other generics attempted to enter. This is a massive turn-off, as it would deprive other generics of any benefits of an uncertain challenge, so why would they bother? Taking away this ability of a branded firm to hold off later challenges would go a long way in solving problems. Many would argue that we shouldn't complain if pharmaceutical companies respond to incentives. The problem is that regulation, as it has been for a while, has created a web of loopholes which incentivizes pharma companies to take advantage of. Aligning these incentives with society's rather than the pharmaceutical company's interests would be a good start. Right, a beigli should be ready now. Take it out of the oven and enjoy the view a little bit. I'm quite happy with this one, especially the walnut one. Looks perfect. The poppy seed one opened up a little bit. Probably the dough was a bit too thin, but I think altogether looks very good. Wait until it cools down and serve it sliced. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Stay tuned and subscribe for more chopping board economics.